today is Alan Higgins. He's got a background in school inspectorate, prisons and army, the military, the lot. So he's very well experienced in what he wants to do. Just chatting to Alan before we got into this, he and I went to the same school. Unbelievably, I mean, what a
Where was that then?
Chipping Sodbury Grammar School. We didn't overlap, I don't think, did we? Anyway, there we are. The talk is about success and failure. Is it a matter of choice or is it an accident of birth? So please welcome Alan in the usual way.
Thank you, Chris. He did mention the fact that we're both old sods. Two cows were standing, looking in a field, chewing the cud. And as they looked over the hedge, so a lorry went by, a milk float went by, and on the side of it was written, homogenized, vitamins added, pasteurized, vitamins added. And one cow looked at the other and said, it makes you feel a bit inadequate, doesn't it? Yeah. And that's how I feel at the moment. Thank you. I feel a bit like the diver who was 40 fathoms below his ship when over the intercom came the words, "Come up quick, we're sinking." But I have a consolation, rather like the man who gave such a talk as this, and he sat down to very sparse applause. Turning to his chairman, he said, "They didn't seem to like it, did they?" "Don't you worry," said his chairman, who was a very good chairman, Chris. "It's not your fault, it's the fault of the person who asked you to speak." And there's that man there. Now, thinking time is a very precious commodity which is in short supply in today's society. But thinking time is more abundant in retirement, isn't it? In retirement, we have time to think, time to listen to the views and see the sounds. And I like that saying, time to listen to the views and see the sounds. There was an occasion when two lights were closing together in Porthcawl, in the Bristol Channel of Porthcawl. And over the intercom from one light came the words, "Steer 10 degrees port." Back came the reply from the other one, "I am advising you to steer 10 degrees port." The reply was swift. "I am the admiral of the fleet, and I am ordering you to steer 10 degrees port." The response was equally swift. "And I am able seaman Doug Jones, and I am advising you to steer 10 degrees port. I am a lighthouse." In a way, that story illustrates the journey which many people make through life. For many, life is very much akin to a moving light, a ship sailing sometimes in uncharted waters, but always searching for the significant signposts, the lighthouses, which guide them towards self-fulfillment and self-esteem. It is a journey which we all make through life. The moving light is also a searchlight, a beacon, which enables people on their journey through life to achieve their personal aspirations through the most appropriate and safest channels. A beacon which all can see as it illuminates progress mainly through calm, but often through troubled waters, helping people to avoid the sandbanks sandbanks and the rocks which might ground them. For many people, the lighthouses standing on solid rock are the established norms in society, those things which give us comfort, the security which comes from the love of a family, the love and fellowship of friends. The lighthouses are the love and support of the various churches to which we might belong, our faith, our belief. The lighthouses, too, are the milestones in our life, marking successful passage to adult maturity. The lighthouses are the many individual and agencies which guide and enable people to make use of all of their talents and resources. And yet, and this is equally important, to come to terms with their personal limitations. Limitations related to physical disability, perhaps, to learning difficulties, or the limitations of advancing age. The lighthouses exemplify the care of many in the community whose commitment and concern for others ensures that people can taste the good things of life, experience success, grow in self-esteem as they travel through the safe shipping lanes of life. That's difficult to say, isn't it? But wait a moment. Surely there are people whose journey through life is just not like that. Many people sail in troubled waters, in a rudderless ship, with no captain at the helm, nobody to advise them when to steer 10 degrees port. Some people don't know where they are going, where they are now, and where they came from. A bit like Columbus, that 15th century sailor, traveler, and explorer. Columbus didn't know where he was going when he started, didn't know where he was when he got there, and didn't know where he had been when he got back. But unlike Columbus, many people lack that sense of purpose, the drive to seek adventure, the desire to explore the world that Columbus had. They lack his confidence, his determination to succeed. Their background is devoid of challenge. They have rarely experienced success or gained the benefits of a safe harbor in times of storms or rough seas. Their journey is made the more difficult because for them, the lighthouses are few and far between. The next lighthouse is just not on their horizon, and they neither have map nor compass to get them to where they want to go. And of course, there are those people who do not even look for the lighthouses. They do not choose to see them when they are right there in front of their nose. They are fog-bound. I have been connected with such people, the so-called failures, all my working life, from teaching young people, to meeting them as a youth officer for the city of Cardiff, to encountering people in prisons, to meeting people sleeping rough, and for those with learning difficulties and disabilities. More of that later. For now, in the summer each year, we hear a lot about, don't we, about those who gain 15 A stars at GCS level, about those going to Oxford. Their photographs are in all the papers, or other universities. But little about those who leave school as soon as they can. Those who leave school with no qualifications whatsoever. Let me tell you a bit about them. Statistics that I give, I'm sorry that they are out of date, as I am. But came shortly after, it's 8 years old anyway. 28% of those who left secondary school, the 30%, over 1/3 of people leave secondary school with no qualifications whatever, as soon as they can, at 16. 28% had no qualifications whatsoever. 45% had no real job to go to. That is a job that they wanted to do. 20% had no job at all. They were unemployed. 32% would experience at least 4 or 5 jobs in the following 5 years. 28% left home before they were 19 years old. 38%, and as many as 50% in some areas, came from a broken home. We don't know anything about that, do we? Between 5 and 10% had no home at all. They were homeless in care or in hostels. 8% had a physical handicap of one kind or another. 10% had learning difficulties with very limited social skills which precluded them from functioning adequately in everyday life. 24% had basic skills deficiencies in literacy and numeracy, which limited their opportunities in the employment markets. 8% had gay tendencies. They questioned their sexuality. 6% had or had had sexually transmitted diseases. Now the figure is much higher. 39% would have at least 2 serious relationships and a number of physical encounters before they are 21. 24% of those who left at 16 had debt-related problems. 18% will have been involved in criminal activities of some kind, and they will have been convicted or cautioned for an indictable offence before they are 19. Each of these statistics on its own is quite difficult for us to contemplate, isn't it? But remember that many 16-year-old leavers have multiple problems. And one statistic across the whole age range, in the South Wales Constabulary area in 2005-2006, 67,000 indictable offences were committed, of which just over half were solved. 41% of those apprehended for committing offences were under 16, of whom 19% were girls. And of those under 16, over 15% had been drinking or were under the influence of drugs at the time the offences were committed. Lastly, 2 more statistics across the whole age range. Firstly, alcoholism has doubled among men and trebled among women in the last 10 years. And secondly, teenage unwanted pregnancies in Britain are as high or higher than anywhere else in Europe, with associated increases in sexually transmitted diseases. These are the sort of people in our communities who need the lighthouses more than ever, need help and advice to steer 10 degrees port. But such people have limited skills to navigate the turbulent waters of life. They lack a sense of direction and a sense of purpose in their lives. The fact that no one has given them a compass or a map or the skills to seek and use one, the fact that no one directs them to steer 10 degrees port, inevitably wrecks them on the rocks of unfulfillment or discontent, and sometimes rebelliousness. Surely all people deserve to have access to the lighthouses along the way as they journey across the rough seas of life. But do they get it? Surely all people need to have advice as to when to steer 10 degrees port to avoid the rocks which spell the disasters in their lives. Surely all people need advice, love, and support in times of trouble. But do they get it? And surely all people deserve to sail in the safe shipping lanes of life. But who is showing them the way? Thinking time. This leads me on to ask the question, do people have a choice in life about what they will be? What kind of life will they lead? What lies ahead of them? Can I get rid of some of these, please? What kind of life will they lead? What lies ahead of them? Or is it the accident of birth which determines what they will become? The accident of birth which dictates what kind of life they will lead. All of us, no matter where or when we were born, make the same journey through life. We are conceived, born, weaned, and nurtured. We all pass through infancy to childhood, childhood to adolescence, adolescence to adulthood. And at the end of that journey, no matter how long or short the time scale, we die. That is not negotiable. And as we look back over our lives, we can pick out those many milestones, those many choices which we have made that shaped our lives. We can identify the lighthouses which pointed the way ahead to the next stage in our life's journey. The lighthouses may have been that individual, that person who influenced us, a particular teacher maybe, or an organization which guided us and enabled us to make wise choices, and maybe to make use of all of our talents and resources. Maybe that was as U3A. As we move through life, we made our choices and looked for the significant signpost to guide us on our way. Did we also accept that we had also to make choices related to our responsibilities? Did we not have responsibility, for example, to make choices on behalf of other people? Those who could not make wise choices, right choices for themselves. Did we not also have a responsibility to make choices on behalf of the society in which we live? A responsibility for the way in which society governs itself, conducts itself. And did we not have, for example, a responsibility for our heritage, a shared responsibility to preserve and conserve our heritage for those who come after us? And Wales is a beautiful country with a language and a culture of its own. It has a rich heritage which has handed down by your forefathers, those men of vision and vibrant minds. It is a land rich in history, steeped in tradition, and abounding in beautiful and natural resources. But in today's society, if people are not to emulate the practices of we, the older generation, if this land of ours, this Wales, in which the world in which we live, is not to become a kind of cornucopia for the selfish West, then people have a great responsibility to make those choices which bring about changes in attitudes in our generation and in the generations to come after us. Preserving our heritage is a question of choice. And as we move through life, made our choices and look for significant signposts to guide us on our way, did we also not accept that we had also to make choices related to our responsibilities? I've said that before. After national service in the RAF, I went to Exeter University as a student to study maths and physical education. I was mad on sport in those days, and I completed a diploma in physical education at St. Luke's College, alongside most of the Welsh rugby team, who were in St. Luke's at the time. You would remember Gareth Griffiths, of course, Glyn John, John Higgins, Gordon Wells, Don Devereux, Brian Sparks, and so on. Even the captain of Devon rugby side could not get into the first 15. Jan Ridd, yes. My first teaching post was in Ledbury Grammar School, where I was appointed to teach maths and physical education. I was always going to teach maths, because on the first day at school, I got a prize for knowing that 5 5s were 27. I got the prize for being the nearest. Now, Ledbury Grammar School was once the country seat of the Holland Martins of Martins Bank fame. Macmillan married into that family. It became his country seat too. Ledbury Grammar School was idyllic. The main house was set in an arboretum with spacious lawns covered in snowdrops and daffodils, sweeping down to a Lebanon cedar and an ornamental lake. The Tudor house was converted into a grammar school in 1936. We taught in what were originally the bedrooms, or in the dressing rooms off. Lessons were delivered in the living rooms or in the dining rooms. The stables and outhouses provided the craft rooms and gymnasium, while the central entrance hall was used for school assemblies, for school concerts, parents' evenings, and the like. The library, with its Jacobean overmantels, remained the same function as the school library, while the headmaster's study was similarly equipped with Jacobean and dark oak panelled walls. It was an academic school, favouring the more able pupils. Many were the sons and daughters of rich hop farmers, of those whose parents were otherwise employed in the agricultural industry. There was a jam factory nearby, making jam for Marks and Spencer's, but very few other industries. The accident of birth has been very kind to me and to those pupils, and Ledbury Grammar School suited them. But there were other pupils among the 350 plus school population who lived on council estates or in the outlying villages who were less privileged. They were not brought up in the rich farming homes or the homes of the so-called middle class, where the support, loving and caring family existed. By the accident of birth, they were born into less caring families. They were not as clever as other pupils in the same school, not as loved as other pupils were, not as well supported as other pupils were. These pupils, usually, but not always, in the B stream. I was one of the foremasters of the beef stream, you can imagine. And although it is many years ago, now I can still remember some of their names and backgrounds, as you, Vivian, will remember some of your people. Terry Estell had his father in prison, mother an alcoholic. Adrian Charles was a small lad, parents divorced, mother illiterate. Michael McCullough, effeminate and gay, bullied intolerably. John Wood, tall, mother on the game, sister pregnant at 14. Mary Davis, in care because her mother had abandoned her, and so on. The accident of birth accounted for what they were and what they were to become. It is a sobering thought, isn't it, that all of us in this room share one thing in common. We were all loved into life by the love of a man for a woman. Were we not all born equal? At the time of our birth, did we not expect to have equal rights to a commonly acceptable quality of life? It is a sobering thought, too, that it is the accident of birth that creates some people better off than others, more able than others, more loved, like, and supported than others. It is the accident of birth which determines whether we are born in the Philippines or in Porthcawl, whether we are born privileged or underprivileged, whether we enjoy the love and support of a loving and caring family, or whether we are born disadvantaged by an uncaring and loving environment. It is the accident of birth which decides whether we are born with white skin or black skin, what our sexuality might be, whether our needs through life are met and succored or neglected and marginalized. Just as I look back over those early years of my life, I've realized just how fortunate I've been, just how kind the accident of birth has been to me. After 7 years teaching at Ledbury Grammar School, I felt I needed more of a challenge. In 1963, I applied for a new experimental post in West Sussex as a youth tutor. The first appointment of its kind in the UK. The brief was to bridge the gap between school and work. It was the year of the Newsom report on education in the UK, and you can remember that, I think. The report recommended raising the school leaving age to 16, and from 1964, the so-called Rosler pupils were in our schools. For the benefit of those who are not educationally minded, Rosler means raising of the school leaving age. I came to Wales on April the 1st, 1966, as the Cardiff Youth Officer. By sheer coincidence, the first Severn crossing was opened on the same day. I didn't expect people to go to so much trouble. I have lived in Wales now for 52 years, and I think now I am qualified to be Welsh. My wife doesn't, who's from the Rhondda. In 1968, I was appointed Curriculum Development Advisor in parallel with my post as City Youth Officer, training teachers to cope with Rosler pupils. In both roles, I learned a lot about the accident of birth and about a question of choice. In 1967, I started with Father Chris Delaney, a Roman Catholic priest, now retired and very ill in Buckfast Abbey, the soup run in Cardiff. There were over 450, mainly men, sleeping rough in Cardiff at the time. They were all ages and from all walks of life. Several were graduates, and a significant number were Irish. The figure given now is in excess of 500 men, with a significant rise in the number of women. Most were sleeping rough because they chose to, many because of circumstances. Few claimed that they were sleeping there rough, were there because of the accident of birth. I want now to refer to the society in which we live. Firstly, society creates a social and moral environment in which we live. Through a range of strategic interventions, society seeks to influence, shape, and support people's passage through life. Without such interventions, the development of the human being and of the society in which we live could not take place. The evolutionary process would be fettered by nonconformity. Yet those interventions, those guiding influences in life, are least likely to occur in the lives of those people who need them most. Those people who, by the accident of birth, need them most. There are many interventions that are brought to bear in our lives as we make the transition from childhood to adult maturity and into old age. Foremost is the influence of the home, of the family, of the immediate area in which, by the accident of birth, we were brought up. The love, care, and nurture which all of us here enjoyed and have every reason to be grateful for. Secondly, I am sure that all of us here recognize that education in all its forms is among those primary interventions which have been positively influential in our lives. Not only the formal education system, but also the education for life of each of us here. Yes, society has changed, and education has changed dramatically over the last few decades. The mysteries of our grandparents are the commonplaces of today. And if you want a story to go with it, because I'm told people remember what I've said, if you get stories, when a headmaster went to the pearly gates, he was greeted by the devil. Don't worry, he said, we've gone comprehensive too. And people have changed too. People are growing up in a confused society, a multiracial society, a society in which we have the so-called Islamic State. Yes, it is a multiracial society with migrants making it more multiracial today. Today's society is a society where former rigid moral and ethical standards have gone, and a society in which what is right and what is wrong is less clear today than it was just a generation or two ago. Maybe it is a better society, a freer society, a more privileged society, a more desirable society. But it is also a much more perilous society in which we live today. I want to emphasize two aspects of that society. Firstly, one of the overwhelming characteristics of our present society. Sorry, can I get rid of some of those, please? Firstly, one of the overwhelming characteristics of our present society is that we have freedom to choose. A freedom of choice on a greater scale than any which past generations ever had. People have to make choices brought about by technological development, biological, medical, and scientific progress and interventions. We live in an age of computers, of information technology, the age of transplants, of spare part surgery. We can sew back severed limbs. We can create life outside the womb. We can clone animals, and maybe humans too, and we can bring about a physical change of sex. And if you need another example of the whole area of choice brought about by biological intervention, we need only to consider the contraceptive pill. Introduced widely in the 1960s, when most of us were growing up. The contraceptive pill brought about many moral and ethical pressures unknown to past generations. Time to think about that. And my second point about today's society is this. It seems to me to be a fast-growing practice in our society for people to be constantly exposing the deficiencies that people have, rather than extolling their virtues. This media, for example, seems to measure its success by the extent to which it is able to expose other people's deficiencies, other people's weaknesses. Himmelwhite said, one perceives oneself as one is treated. One perceives oneself as one is treated. How true that is. We all react to the way in which we are treated. It is a basic human need to be liked, to be well regarded, and to be recognized for what we have achieved, rather than be exposed for what we cannot do. People today should be far too busy extolling the virtues that people have, that there just isn't time to expose their deficiencies. In 1972, I met and worked with a BBC TV producer who was at the time making a documentary series about a question of choice. You may remember it. We agreed that although the accident of birth was responsible for the subsequent pattern of many people's lives, there were some who had chosen to live in a particular way. After many planning sessions, we made 4 programs which focused on individuals who had specifically chosen the life that they currently live. I did the research, incidentally, and I did the commentaries on BBC. We chose, for example, a man sleeping rough. We chose a nun, and we chose a prostitute, and we chose a black youth worker. We asked one question to start with. Why did you choose that particular way of life? All 4 tried to justify their decisions for leading the life that they had chosen. But although they succeeded to some extent, I was less impressed by the reasons given by the nun for the choice that she had made than I was for any of the other 3. The man sleeping rough, an Irishman with a colourful language, made the most convincing case. While the prostitute argued well why she had chosen her way of life was based upon sheer necessity in her family of young people were to survive. The black youth worker was Chalky White. Do you remember him? Who died in 1973, soon after making the program, after receiving an MBE for his work in Butetown, Cardiff. What being involved in making the programs brought home to me was that those living lives full of difficulties, the result of the accident of birth, deserved much more support and understanding from the communities in which they lived than those who had made a rational choice to live their lives in a particular way. 2 years later, in 1974, I joined the school's inspectorate, based in the Welsh office. My brief was mainly in post-school education, with special responsibilities in adult education that included the LEA, extramural, WA, Winners Institute, Merced y Wawr, and so on. And then the youth service, LEA and voluntary. And I started thinking that we should do inspections of voluntary youth work, because the voluntary sector has made a contribution to education second to none, in my view, and it mostly delivered in the voluntary sector. Prison education. I spent a lot of time in prison. Armed forces education. Now, the armed forces education, we were invited by the War Department to look at education in the armed forces because there was a lot of bullying going on. As an HMI, I saw much more about the accident of birth, which had created some people more able than others, more loved and supported than others. I came across those with learning difficulties, those with disabilities, and of course I came across the high flyers. For 11 years during my time as HMI, I directed the national conferences of the Young Farmers Clubs of Wales. In 1980, I brought the conference to Cardiff to show the contrast between the idyllic rural life and life in an urban context. We took members, for instance, YFC members, to the Salvation Army hostel on Bute Street, to the docks area to meet those sleeping rough, to the double amputees hospital at St. David's Hospital, to the home for alcoholics on Riverside. We took them to meet people sleeping rough. By prior arrangement with Brian, I took 4 girls to meet him. Brian lived in a disused manhole near Clarence Road Bridge in Tiger Bay. He met the 4 girls, who were all in their late teens, standing in his manhole with his arms resting on the edges. As we were leaving, Brian said to one of the girls, "Shall I write you a poem?" He produced a stump of pencil, and on a sheet torn from the girl's notebook, he wrote, "If I were a flower, could you pick me?" Not would you pick me, but could you pick me? After about 20 years later, the organizer for Powys YFC, Vera Jones, retired, and I was invited to speak at her retirement do. I told the story of Brian. At the end of my talk, a rather buxom woman got to her feet and said, with tears in her eyes, "I was that girl, and here is that poem." And she produced a scrap of paper, all those, as Brian had written it, all those years ago. Even though Brian was a down and out, sleeping rough, he certainly made an impression on that girl and contributed to that girl's life. How does one measure success and failure? And finally, we have all been travelers on a journey through life and have made full use of the signposts, the lighthouses on the way. Signposts which have provided us with many choices as we journeyed through life. We have been fortunate that we could see those signposts, fortunate that we could make those choices, wise choices, right choices, choices which would result in success or failure. And as we have traveled through life, we have come across those people who, through the accident of birth, were unable to see those signposts, which would enable them to make those choices, make wise choices. Wise choices. I want to end by referring to another traveler through life, whose journey is recorded. Whose journey is recorded by John Bunyan, that 17th century Puritan tinker who was in prison for his beliefs. In his book, The Pilgrim's Progress, Bunyan wrote of the journeyings of Christian, who was striving to reach his celestial city. You will recall that on his journey, Christian had a number of companions, including pliable, doubtful, timorous, mistrust, and you remember how each of them fell by the wayside because they had no faith, no perseverance, no commitment, no vision, and no celestial city to strive for. As a result, they fell into the slough of despond. We must never do that, or allow others to do that. You will recall, for example, the interpreter's house. In that house, Christian was shown a man throwing buckets of water onto a fire, and as he did so, the fire burned more exultantly. Christian asked for an explanation. He was taken to the next room and shown a man there who was pouring buckets of oil onto the fire through a hole in the wall. The buckets of water I see as those dampening effects of those who control the resources. The buckets of water are the petty irritations that spring from jealousies or from a lack of information about what agencies in our communities are trying to do. The buckets of water are sometimes the rantings of politicians who do not, it seems, understand how many people in our communities live. Politicians who have not experienced homelessness, unemployment, illiteracy, neglect. The buckets of oil, on the other hand, I see as the enthusiasm, the expertise, the commitment, which, in spite of everything, keeps alive the vision and the faith of those who work with people in order that they may taste the good things of life. The buckets of oil stimulate the aspirations of people, motivate individuals and agencies in our communities, which provide the signposts along the way, enable us to make right choices when we need to. The buckets of oil are the rich tapestry of opportunities which people pour over other people so that they are fired into life and are helped to make good use of all of their personal resources and yet come to terms with their personal limitation. What it is important for all of us to remember is that a drop of oil burns quickly and does not heat the coals. Bring all the drops of oil together, and we will have a fire which no dampening effect can put out, no buckets of water can extinguish. One thing is certain, we cannot afford to leave the fire untended or fail to set us alight, or to allow people to smolder with discontent. There is an apocryphal story told about St. David. St. David was about to enter heaven, when he was told he must first visit hell. In hell, he saw that the tables were laden with good things to eat and drink, but all the people were grey and sullen, were not speaking to each other. St. David asked for an explanation. He was shown that all the people had 6-foot-long spoons. He went to heaven, and there the scene was much the same. The tables were similarly laden with all sorts of good things to eat and drink, but people were happy and joyful, were laughing and talking together, yet all of them had 6-foot-long spoons as well. St. David asked for an explanation and was told, in heaven we feed each other. As a society, in all our endeavors, we need to feed each other. Tennyson, in his Ulysses, said, I am part of all that I've met. By being here, I share the warmth of this group. I share your sense of unity, the spirit of fellowship present in this room. We all need to be part of something good, don't we? We all need to taste success and appreciate failure, whether as a result of the accident of birth or a question of choice. That's it.
Thank you, Alan. Have we got any questions? You've covered it all, Alan, I think. Yeah.
You started off with the Admiral in his great boat and this little light which wouldn't get out of the way. And it was resolved because there were two human beings on each side that talked to each other and said what they were, and then they knew how to avoid a collision. Nowadays, the ship would probably be on autopilot, and unless there was somebody monitoring that, the lighthouse has nobody in it anymore. It's all automatic. So there's no human beings. So if conflict arises and there's no human beings there, trouble. Now, technology has left most of us behind, hasn't it, John? And it's great, it's fine. We've got all these wonderful things, and life can be good if you know how to use it. Kids do, but I think it's getting too far. It's carried us away. The human input has to be there still to watch these technical things, because they're by computers, and computers only do what they've been told to do. They can't think for themselves yet. So I think human beings, we've still, like us, have still got a place with all the technology that's around us, as long as we make sure that we have an input.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, just to add to that, do you ever get phone calls and there's a recorded message on the other end? There's a computer talking to you. It's really irritating. Any other questions? Okay. I'd like to thank you ever so much for that, Alan. That's really very interesting. I wonder if a part of this is, as you go through life, you can either have lucky breaks sometimes or sometimes you can't. I mean, that must come into it somewhere as well, is it?
Obviously, yes. Yes, education must be the be-all and end-all, as you people here, part of the University of the Third Age, will recognize. It is education for life, isn't it? And the problem is that there are so many people in our schools that just don't recognize that academic life is for them. They don't recognize that. No.
Okay, thank you, Alan. Well, it just remains for me to say thank you very much, Alan. That was a fascinating talk. And please, will you thank Alan in the usual way?